Alright, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII, kind of everything, Crisis Core Reunion, Remake, the future upcoming games, etc., etc. And we're talking about the voice actors, because with the recent Crisis Core gameplay and stuff that we got to see more of these characters voiced by the newer voice actors, right? Because if you were to put up, like, Sephiroth's dialogue, which we do hear a good chunk of when it comes to Remake, but if you compare it to, like, other characters, we just haven't heard him talk a lot compared to them, especially, obviously, with Caleb Pierce's Zack. Like, we've heard snippets, essentially. We get a little bit of dialogue towards the end of the game of Remake, and then also at the end of Remake. And we got, like, some, the episode intermission ending, and then, like, one little tiny bit with the Rebirth trailer. And that's kind of all we've had of the character of Zack. But obviously, with the upcoming Crisis Core Reunion, we're going to hear a lot from these characters, and we kind of already have with, like, Tokyo Game Show shit, like, people playing the game and the gameplay they put out there. People are already kind of back to trashing these VAs, and it's just kind of annoying. And really, it's just down to people comparing them to the original voice actors. So they're saying that, Tyler Hoechlin's not as good as George Newbern, or Caleb Pierce is not as good as Rick Gomez, which to a certain degree I can't disagree with. For one, I'm a big George Newbern fan. He voices Superman. Superman's one of my favorite fictional characters of all goddamn time. So I'm a fan of George Newbern outside of FF7 stuff. And then I'm obviously used to Rick Gomez's voice because of Crisis Core and the little bit he's done otherwise, like Advent Children and stuff like that. So when I talk about the new VAs, it's not necessarily that I'm saying that I think that they're better than the originals. I've even said this before on the channel. Like, I don't really have that much of an attachment to the original VAs, outside of maybe George Newbern and a little bit Rick Gomez. I've said this, you can go back years on the channel. I'm not a big fan of Steve Burton's Cloud. I've never been a big fan of him. I think he's very depressing sounding, like he's sad boy Cloud all the time, which is fine for certain stories, like maybe Advent Children, but you don't need to be sad boy Cloud all the time. I'm just not a big fan of his line delivery. He just sounds like he has a mouthful of food or some shit. Like, Cloud sounds the same in almost every situation outside of very specific situations where he needs to show a little bit of emotion. And I just think after playing Remake, like, Cody Christian is just night and day, miles ahead of him as Cloud Strife. Now, when it comes to the Remake project, I understand when people aren't the biggest fans of them changing the voice acting cast on the English side of things, because for starters, they didn't do that on the Japanese side of shit. Like, it's still the same voice acting cast that's been there forever. Like, it's the same guy voicing Sephiroth that's been voicing Sephiroth this entire fucking time. He's voicing him in Remake. Same thing with, like, I think all the other cast. I want to say that we did cover something somewhat recently where they changed something in Crisis Core. I don't remember if it's the voice actor for Genesis or Angel or something. I think they changed somebody there. But again, for the most part, it's the same VAs this entire time for these characters. So I get why people would be a little upset with that. But also, if you go back to, like, the 2015 reveal of Remake, the gameplay trailer, the PSX trailer, like, you have the original voice acting cast. Like, back then, Steve Burton was still voicing Cloud.
You're doing this for the planet, same as us.
Not interested.
We also still had Bo Billingsley voicing Barrett back then, but I don't know if there's that much of an attachment to, like, the extended cast when it comes to the FF7 compilation back then. Maybe something like Aerith, just because Aerith got a lot of dialogue in Crisis Core, but also I've never heard anybody complain about Brianna White. Like, obviously, the new VAs are doing a great job. And I've been covering this game and talking about it since 2015, but kind of heavily talking about it like late 2018, early 2019. And really, it's not like people as a whole just hate the new cast. Like, it seems like it's really just a big three, right? They're indifferent on Cloud because they're just so used to Steve Burton. George Newbern is obviously a god, so people just liked his interpretation of Sephiroth and just don't think Tyler's doing, like, as good of a job. And then obviously once we actually had Remake and played it, we got to see Caleb Pierce's interpretation of Zack Fair, and people just didn't like it. It's not like people across the board just hate the new VAs or whatever the case. There were people back in the day, like a couple years back, that had, like, change.org petitions where they wanted Square Enix to, like, bring in the old VAs and have them, like, re-record all the lines, which is obviously not a fucking feasible task, and put out, like, a DLC pack or some shit where you can have the old VAs or whatever. But besides those, like, group of people, like, people have come to accept the majority of the new cast. Except for, of course, Sephiroth and Zack, which is mostly what this video is about. And I do think that when a Crisis Core Reunion drops later this year, December 13th, that'll be kind of the ultimate test, so to speak, because you're going to get to see the new VAs a lot. Because if you haven't played Crisis Core, for those of you out there that haven't, like, you get a lot of Sephiroth dialogue, right? Way more than you get for, like, the rest of the compilation, really. And obviously you get a lot of Zack because he's the main character, but you're also putting up the new VAs against the old VAs because they're voicing the exact same game, the exact same lines, and actually, in fact, even more lines than the original guys did, since the game's going to be entirely voiced. And with these two characters in Crisis Core, you're going to get a wide range of emotions, especially from, like, Sephiroth, because Sephiroth is, like, human in this game, right? For the most part. You're getting regular, just soldier, hero Sephiroth prior to him going crazy at Nibelheim, right? Like, you get a lot of the game, you'll get dialogue and get to see, like, Sephiroth being, like, friendly with, like, Genesis and Angel and shit, and, like, a friend, essentially, to Zack as well. Like, it's kind of crazy to see this version of Sephiroth. So we're going to see Tyler Hoechlin's, like, kind of regular Sephiroth persona, because if you go to, like, Remake, he's kind of, like, menacing in a lot of ways, which is why I don't think you can really compare him and George Newbern, because this Sephiroth is literally different in every way possible than the Sephiroth that George Newbern has voiced outside of Crisis Core Union, because obviously that's the same story in game. Like the actual Final Fantasy VII evil villain Sephiroth has not really been voiced by George Newbern outside of like Nibelheim incident stuff and maybe select scenes. Then obviously Advent Children's still like evil Sephiroth, but a lot of what happens in FF7, the story, has never been voiced by George Newbern. So this is kind of a complete different interpretation of Sephiroth in a lot of ways. But also the fact that your remake itself is kind of like a sequel, right? Or some sort of follow-up to the rest of the compilation. Like it's literally just a completely different Sephiroth. So again, you're free to compare them if you want to. You can like George Newbern more if you like. That's perfectly fine. I don't even disagree with that necessarily. But again, are completely different interpretations of the same character. And for what it seems like they're doing with the remake story, like we need a really evil Sephiroth. And I think Tyler's portrayal is like nailing that perfectly, where he sounds really evil and menacing. And again, we haven't really seen that kind of Sephiroth portrayed that much on screen. Again, you get very tiny bits of it in Crisis Core. You get a little bit of it at the end of Advent Children. But the whole middle part where you get truly evil Sephiroth during FF7 has not really been portrayed and voiced. So I like what Tyler's doing with the character personally. And then, of course, we have Zack Fair.
Drag our asses all this way. This is the welcome we get.
Look, I'll be completely honest with you guys. I don't hate Caleb Pierce's interpretation of Zack Fair. That being said, when you first hear him talk in Remake, if you're used to Rick Gomez's interpretation of the character, it is quite jarring, because the voices are astronomically different. So I can certainly agree on that front. Like when I first heard him in Remake, I definitely had my thoughts and opinions, but I've kind of gotten used to it now because I've heard it a lot at this point. But also people initially didn't like how he sounded in Remake, right? But then some people turned their opinions around once they heard him at the end of the episode intermission, where admittedly the voice acting is better. Plus you get like a different version of Zack. We can kind of tell he's nervous because he's trying to prep himself before he goes into the church and thinks he's going to talk to Aerith. Plus like his shock when Aerith isn't there. Like you can tell that Caleb Pierce is a good voice actor. Maybe there's just a difference in the directing of that scene versus like the end of Remake. I don't entirely know. So to reiterate, we have two different scenes. One where people think that the voice acting is good. One where people think the voice acting is bad. And that should be enough to tell you that, hey, maybe we should give the guy a fucking chance, right? Maybe we should see what he's capable of. And I know we've got a decent amount of gameplay and shit over the last couple of days because of Tokyo Game Show, but also you're seeing a lot of clips and shit out of context, a lot of dialogue out of context. You're not seeing the full cutscene and shit. But also some of the dialogue from like trailers and shit has the wrong music in the background for what the scene's actually going to have. But also the game's still a little under like 3 months away. We don't even know if the dialogue that we're hearing from cutscenes and gameplay and shit like that in trailers is even the finalized dialogue. They could be still re-recording lines and shit for all we know. Ultimately, when it comes to Caleb Pierce's Zack Fair, I don't hate it, right? I don't necessarily love it. I don't think it's better than Rick Gomez, but I don't feel like we've heard enough yet to really form an opinion. Now, Crisis Core Reunion's coming out in a couple months. We can play that game once we finish playing Crisis Core Reunion, especially like the ending scene, like that ending death scene for Zack. That'll be the real test. Like we'll see how good Caleb Pierce is as a voice actor during that scene when he's passing the sword on to Cloud, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he survives at the end. I guess it could be a different ending for all we know. That's neither here nor there for the discussion of this video. What people don't seem to understand is it's like, regardless of whether you like the new VAs or not, it's not their fucking fault. Square Enix is the one that hired them. The Square Enix is the one directing them during the recording of lines and shit. So ultimately, the fault lies with them. Like if they got a weird voice for Zack Fair, if you think it's a weird voice, and we get through Crisis Core Union, and we're all just like, you know what? Not the biggest fan. Like I definitely wish they did somebody else for the voice. Like we can all agree on that, but it's not Caleb Pierce's fault. There's no reason to trash Caleb Pierce online because of how he sounds as Zack Fair, because it's not his goddamn fault that Square Enix hired him. That's really kind of what the motivation for this video was, is just the amount of like hate that Caleb Pierce has been getting online the last couple of days. And it's just like, again, not his fault. He's being directed that way. He's the one that they hired. They chose him to be the voice of Zack Fair. There's got to be a reason for that. They've knocked it out of the park so far, in my opinion, with all the new voice acting cast. There's got to be a reason they chose the guy. Maybe we just haven't seen that yet. And maybe we'll see what that is when it comes to Crisis Core Reunion. So I guess kind of the point of this is like, let's reserve our judgment, right? Everybody's like jumping to conclusions. It was the same thing when it came to Remake, right? People freaking out, jumping to conclusions that there was a new voice acting cast. And then we got the game, we played the game, and now everybody, for the most part, loves all the new characters. But if after Crisis Core Reunion, people are still indifferent on Caleb Pierce in a game where he's going to get to portray all kinds of different emotions for the character of Zack, from happiness, sadness, anger, all that other shit. If it's still like people just don't really care for his portrayal, then maybe it's just a weird casting choice on Square Enix's part. Maybe it's just for some reason with this specific character that he's got a weird voice. If that ends up being the case, like I can accept that. I'll let you guys know. I'm as honest as I can be on this channel. Always have been. The entire time I've been doing fucking YouTube, I voice my opinion, my thoughts. And if I play Crisis Core Reunion and I think that Caleb Pierce is a weird casting choice for the character of Zack Fair, you'll hear it here first. Like I'll tell you. Like I'll be like, you know what? I was wrong. I think he sounded kind of good with remake shit, but for some reason in Crisis Core Reunion, I just didn't vibe with the casting choice. I'll tell you guys. But until then, how about we leave the voice actors alone on social media, you fucking weirdos. That's pretty much the video, my dudes. Just wanted to do kind of a discussion today about this. I was going to do some other videos in the last couple of days or so, but I feel like after seeing more and more talk of this, people hate on Caleb Pierce, a little bit hate on Tyler Hoechlin. There's less of that these days, but there's still like the detractors out there, the people that just don't like him because he's not George Newbern. It's a little ridiculous. Just kind of want to talk about it. That's the video, my dudes. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to if you guys already want to stay more Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII Reunion / FF7 Rebirth Remake Project voice actor talk content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter @YT. I'm a Discord loser. Sorry, in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Drag our asses.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.